All right, so welcome back to the MedTech Trends podcast, everyone. I'm your host, Dorian. So today we have with us two guests, and they're joining us from a company called PAI Health. So I'll introduce them, and then we'll get into a couple of questions because I'd love to learn quite a bit more about PAI Health and the work that's going on there. A lot of really interesting stuff. So today we have with us Sally Powell. She's the general manager of PAI Health. Now, Sally is a bilingual and Mandarin Chinese executive with a decade of leading companies in the international insurance space. She joins PAI from AXA Global Healthcare, where she was head of marketing for Asia Pacific. Sally previously held senior management positions with Bupa Global, including China country manager. We also have with us Dr. Carl or Chip Lavie. He's on the advisory board of PAI Health. He's also a professor of medicine and a director at the John Ochsner Heart and Vascular Institute in New Orleans, Louisiana. He is the editor-in-chief of Progress in Cardiovascular Disease and has authored over 1,000 studies in areas including cardiovascular rehabilitation and prevention, obesity, exercise, and many other areas. He also holds a couple other appointments, including being the associate editor and cardiovascular section editor of the Mayo Clinic Proceedings. So welcome to you both. I appreciate your time this morning.
Hi, Dorian. Thank you for having
Pleasure
us.
to be here, Dorian.
Wonderful. Now, so PAI's mission is to become the global health standard for physical activity. It's a nice, big, bold mission. It's global. There's obviously a huge need for this sort of thing. So it's great to get into this topic. PAI Health started out, I believe, as a hardware company, hardware and software company. It's now much more of a software company, and it's growing in its partnerships with a lot of other industry providers in this space. And I wonder if we can kind of go back a little bit to the roots. How did the company start? How did the founders meet? And was there a moment where there was a decision to sort of change it into what PAI Health is today?
That's a great question. Thank you, Dorian. So the company actually started as MIO Global over 20 years ago, and it was founded by a real trailblazing pioneer in digital health by a lady called Liz Dickinson, who is no longer in the company, but still very active in digital health. And it was a brand of fitness trackers with hardware and with distribution all over the world. And the MIO devices were best well known in the industry for having the best heart rate sensor technology at the time. There was a device called the MIO Alpha, which some of your audience may know, which was the first wrist wearable with continuous accurate heart rate monitoring. And that was launched in 2012. Now, the company was approached by a research team from NTNU, and that's the Norwegian University of Science and Technology in Norway, of all places. And they had developed the PAI algorithm. Now, PAI stands for Personal Activity Intelligence. And we acquired the IP with plans to launch it in a wearable device, starting with the MIO device. However, the fitness hardware market became too challenging, and our resources were diverted into being a software company. And so we decided to focus on being a device and platform agnostic company, and we wanted to scale and focus on B2B channels. And that's where I joined the company back in 2018.
Okay, so quite a bit of history. So it's been around for at least 20 years if we're going all the way back to the roots, and relatively recent heavy kind of focus on the software application of it, using PAI as a very evidence-based, scientifically backed, peer-reviewed, published concept, and turning that into something that can really affect a lot of people in a positive way. Now, I'm wondering also how has the company grown, and are there any sort of indicators that you might be able to give us in terms of usership, number of people that are using it, or the number of partnerships that you have?
Sure, sure. So, like I just mentioned, we have only been around since 2018 and very focused on B2B channels to date. So, our most significant partnerships are with Gen which is a global reinsurer and a Berkshire Hathaway company. And by working with them, we are able to embed our software technology for them to sell on as a value-add service to their insurance customers all around the world. We also have a strategic relationship with the American Heart Association. The PI score on a more consumer level is available to millions of users around the world in the Huami and Amazfit devices. Huami being the leading smart wearables company in the world. We will also soon be launching in the Prudential Asia super app called Pulse, which has already had over 17 million app downloads across 12 countries in Asia. And that's incredibly exciting because it really demonstrates how scalable, accessible, impactful an algorithm like PI can be. We are also seeing particular interest from cardiac rehab programs and the general cardiac prevention space from researchers and payers, providers, and pharmaceutical companies. So that's going to be a key focus of ours this year. There is a current crisis in that attendance is lower than ever during COVID, when traditionally cardiac rehab has been a very center location-based program. And this is concerning because we know that cardiac rehab programs save lives. And we'll be hearing more from Chip in a moment about that. So we are going to see a great acceleration in our shift to exploring virtual at-home cardiac rehab programs or more hybrid models. And PI, we're very well positioned to help serve this market. And it's something that we're really passionate about.
It's awesome to hear about the partnership and the pilot studies and perhaps ongoing studies as well that you've run with Genry, um, major provider of health insurance. And it's also nice to see that they're very kind of proactive and population health focused. And there's some great work coming out of there. There are some links that I'll include in the description below, but some of the early results seem really interesting. I think there was a pilot run with about 500 members where they found very positive results in terms of helping people to stay on track with their fitness levels and seeing positive results. So I'd love to get into that a little bit later on in the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely, Dory. And it's important to let people know that that pilot study was done globally in-house with Genry employees, majority being actuaries. And it also happened during the start of the pandemic. And it was a very testing time for lots of people around the globe. And we were delighted to see that after that 16 weeks, PI made the biggest impact, the most measurable nominal improvements in people's cardiovascular fitness, the segment of people who were least active to begin with.
Mhm.
And that's really the segment that we want to cater for and help people get healthier. That's a much larger segment.
Definitely. There was another piece that I found really interesting about that study because they reported that persistence on for anybody that was using fitness trackers or other tools like that, persistence was extremely high. In fact, it was much higher than they even anticipated going into that study. And maybe some of that is kind of masked with underlying kind of effects because of what's going on with stay-at-home orders and the whole pandemic kind of going on. But that is huge. Being able to adhere over the long run to treatment plans, fitness plans, that is the thing that actually ultimately has a major impact on cardiovascular fitness and other outcomes.
Absolutely. And I can share with you, Dorian, that we did a lot of qualitative studies and questionnaires during that particular pilot. And what we found was that because we had invested heavily in the onboarding to really educate people about cardiorespiratory fitness, the importance of it, and really educate people about the science behind PI and how personal it was. We found that through this education, and really conveying to people that this is something that's backed by science, that it's personalized to you and really fits around your lifestyle, what you're already doing, really made people more committed to it because they believed in it. And the what's in it for me question was answered up front quite quickly.
Very important point. I'll also mention too. So I've tried Pi. I downloaded the app, and I've been a Fitbit user for a number of years now, but I find myself sort of trailing off. I'm also coming from a background. I I was a competitive swimmer. I ran cross country. I used to cycle a lot. I used to weightlift a lot, played a lot of field sports growing up. And, when you get into the working world and things sort of taper off. And so unless you're actively pushing and, to create a lifestyle around that, it's very hard to keep up with that lifestyle and maintain your health and fitness levels. So Pi actually, what I found, and over about a week or two of actually using it, it actually helps to keep me on track. This is just my personal
Great.
experience. It's actually really useful. Um, the piece that I really wanted to touch on, I think at this point, is the science behind Pi score, and the fact that it's actually backed by a lot of evidence, unlike a lot of other metrics out there, because there's so many trackers and a lot of wearables and so on. They're not all created equal. So I wanted to get into, and perhaps this is a more of a question for Chip. What kind of research was done to create the Pi score, and what were some of the outcomes in terms of disease prevention and its association to longevity and mortality, and are the results generalizable? There's a lot to unpack there. So I think what we can do at this point is jump into a couple of slides that Chip has put together for us. And yeah, I'd love to learn a little bit more about this because I think it's extremely useful.
Thanks, Dorian. Yeah, so PI actually has a lot of science behind it. Obviously, we need people to be exercising, and this has been known for centuries. Cicero said, exercise and temperance can preserve something of our strength in old age. Socrates said, it is not bodily habits spoiled by rest and illness, but preserved for a long time by motion and exercise. The Earl of Derby said, those who think they have not time bodily exercise will sooner or later have to find time for illness. And the famous clinician, Paul Dudley White, said healthy exercise is valuable not only for the maintenance of good physiologic functions of the body, but also mental clarity and feelings of good health. And Socrates also talked about the dosing of exercise. If we could give every individual the right amount of nourishment and exercise, not too little, but also not too much, we could have found the safest way to health. And so traditionally, exercise has been people warm up and then go do some level of exercise for whatever minutes that they do it at a moderate pace or at a higher pace. And they keep their heart rate for the 20, 30 minutes about the same the whole time. But there's a lot of evidence for higher intensity exercise where you warm up and get your heart rate to a higher percentage of its peak in smaller bursts with some rest in between. And there's a lot of data. One of the authors of this a lot is a guy named Ulrich Wisloff, who actually was the founder of PI. And he has articles showing that the higher intensity exercise, you improve your fitness more and you have better effects on your heart structure and function. And I did a study many years ago in heart failure patients, and we found the same thing, that they get greater improvements. What we really would care about, though, is clinical prognosis and cardiac events. And there's actually very little on high intensity exercise assessing major clinical events. And that's why PI really is so useful, because there's science behind it. Ulrich Wisloff developed this at the KG Jebsen Center of Exercise and Medicine in Norway. And I think we know that people generally, or a lot of times clinicians want to know, what should I tell my patients? And the guidelines all say, tell them to do 150 minutes of moderate exercise a week or 75 minutes of vigorous exercise, but without a lot of definition of what that actually is. And we know that the most important thing is improving the physical fitness. And so we really need to motivate people to increase their physical activity for sure, but particularly to increase their physical activity effectively, whereas it's improving their physical fitness. And we know there's a lot of wearables and fitness apps, but typically they have not gotten to the point of getting people to necessarily improve their fitness. So there's some general things like the steps. Do a 10,000 steps, or just do 30 minutes per day. But this is vague, and it's not does not give a detailed response to reflect the body's response to each activity. So even though everyone tries hard, there's still no simple way to tell how active you need to be to improve your fitness and to stay healthy. There's no real standard. The race is about giving you the most advanced information to show everything that's possible with today's technology, because it is possible now. And heart rate reflects the body's response to any type of physical activity. Everybody measures heart rate, but no one really tells you exactly what it means. And so the scientific question, can we make a meaningful heart rate metric for physical activity tracking that could translate into lower risk for various lifestyle diseases? And that's what Ulrich Wisloff did. He had a major study called the Hunt study in Norway, where he took over 5,000 people, knew their gender, knew their age, knew their resting heart rates, knew their maximum heart rates from exercise assessments, and then measured their heart rate during physical activity over a 7-day period and had in-depth questions about their physical activity. And from this, they developed a personal activity intelligence, or a PAI score, in these individuals, showed that it correlated tremendously with health status. If your PAI score was low, you had much more risk factors like high blood pressure, high glucose, high cholesterol, obesity, etc. What's really important, though, is what it does to prognosis. What it does it reflect cardiovascular disease, total mortality? So then he applied what he got out of the Hunt 3 trial. He applied this to over 40,000 people in Norway that were assessed many decades before, and then followed for 26 years, over 1 million person years of observation. During this time, there were over 10,000 deaths and close to 4,000 deaths that were due to cardiovascular disease. And we actually published a paper using this data in a major journal, the American Journal of Medicine, 3 years ago, where I was a co-author. I'm not a co-author on all of their papers, but I was on this very first one, where we basically showed that if people got what's referred to as a PAI score, reflecting what the physical activity that they did for the previous week, if they achieved a PAI score of over 100 weekly, they had an excellent prognosis, they had an excellent survival. If you got a 50 PAI score, you had about 2/3 of the benefit, whereas if you had lower PAI scores, you had much higher mortality. So men and women who got a weekly PAI score of 100 lived on average 5 years longer than those who had a PAI score of 30. And if you were young, like 55, 60, lifespan was increased by 7 years. If you were over 70, it only increased by 2 years, but still that's pretty important for someone in a higher age group to extend quality years even by a little bit. And if you had more risk factors, like if you smoked, it's obviously better not to be smoking, but if you were a smoker and you achieved 100 PAI, you reduced your risk by 30%. If you're hypertensive, again, 30% lower. Overweight, 30%. And the highest benefit was even in diabetics. If you had diabetes, you reduce your risk by 54% if you achieved the PAI score of 100. Now, subsequent papers, I wasn't on this one, but they published this one in my journal. You mentioned I was editor-in-chief of Progress in Cardiovascular Diseases. We looked at changes in PAI over a 10-year period in a large number, close to 25,000 people followed for 18 years. And again, they showed the best prognosis were those who had 100 PAI at the baseline and 100 PAI 10 years later. The worst was if you had low PAI at both time spans, but if you had a low PAI, but you improved your PAI, you had a very good prognosis, probably getting about 80% of the benefit. Another paper, very important in regard to what Sally said about cardiac rehab, they had a paper in Mayo Clinic Proceedings. I'm not a co-author on this either, but I, as you mentioned, I'm the associate editor and cardiovascular section editor of the Mayo Clinic Proceedings, which has in the top 3 readerships in the world, 130,000 readers of the Mayo Clinic Proceedings. This study of patients with cardiovascular disease, it was 3,133 patients with cardiovascular disease followed for 12.5 years. And again, those who had got 100 PAI among the cardiac patients, most of these are patients with blocked heart arteries, coronary heart disease, they had a 24% lower mortality than those who had lower levels of fitness. Now, that's in all Norway data. So people would say, does that apply elsewhere? So we applied this data in this paper to the aerobic center longitudinal study in the United States of over 56,000 participants followed for 15 years and basically showed the same things in the United States. Those who got over 100 PAI had by far the best prognosis. You had about 2/3 of the benefit if you got between 50 and 99 PAIs. If you had some PAI, if you at least some activity, you did better than those who were inactive. And in the next paper that's online right now in my journal, will be out in several months. We looked at change in PAI in this population, again, showed the same type of trends. The best was if you had high PAI at baseline, and on second test, worst was if you had low PAI all the time, and then various degrees if you changed your PAI in the right direction over time. Now we know that now a lot of people call sitting the new smoking because there's so much sedentary time. We're all sitting right now, but a lot of people spend most of their day sitting. And so they actually looked at this from the sedentary behavior standpoint, published it in my journal, Nina Zisko with Ulrich Wisloff, and showed that obviously the best would be if you didn't sit very much and you had high PAI. But if you sat a lot and your PAI was high, it largely negated the effect of the sitting on the odds for cardiovascular risk clustering. This is in young people, then middle-aged people and older people, all the same benefits from having high PAI, even helping people make up for their prolonged sedentary behavior. So again, PAI has a lot of data. It's a simple metric based on a personal profile and heart rate data that guides people how active they need to be to stay healthy. It's simple. You're just looking at the number for the previous week. It's scientific in Norway, in the United States. And I can tell you right now, we have data that we're working on a publication in over 500,000 people from China that is showing the exact same things. It provides important insights. It's universal because it's personalized to the individual. It's adaptive. If you improve your health, it changes your heart rate response. So it adapts with you, and it tracked over 7 days, providing flexibility for people's busy lives, meaning you can go 3 days with no exercise. If you got the PAI the previous 4 days, then you achieved your goal. It's based on the individual profile, the patient's gender, their age, their resting heart rate, their exercise heart rate. It's assessed over 7 days, and there's data now in the United States and in Norway and in China coming soon that shows that it is associated with quite dramatic reductions in cardiovascular disease and prognosis. So for example, a person can go out and walk 10,000 steps, but not get very many PAI if their steps are slow, if people are not raising their heart rate much. And you can do other activity where you get a lot less steps, but you can get a lot of PAI points because your heart rate was higher during the physical activity. So we want people to get to 100 PAI, but even getting to 50, you can get 2/3 of the benefit. Getting to 100 is the maximum benefit. And interestingly, if you get way above 100, you don't seem to get much additional benefit. It's fine too. There's no harm in getting higher, but just reaching the 100 point seems to produce almost maximal benefit. It's based on your heart rate during exercise. And the more fit you are, then you have lower heart rates. And so then you have to do a little bit more to achieve the same number of PAI points. The most you can get in 1 day is 75. That means you have to at least do 2 times a week where you get your heart rate up. And the higher your heart rate, the more PAI points you get. And PAI is based on the resting heart rate. And so you can wear your device around the clock, and anything that you're doing that is in raising the heart rate could be getting some PAI points. So that's, again, a very quick overview of the science of this. I think it's very exciting. And I think this is certainly way more proven than almost any other technology and wearable that there is out there today. And if people really were getting this amount of PAI, they would be doing a tremendous help for reducing their risk of cardiovascular disease and all-cause mortality.
Thanks so much, Dr. Lavie, for that presentation. That's there's a lot of detail there that warrants reiteration, because it's when we're talking about a science-backed metric that's essentially based on, I believe, close to a million, nearing a million people, and well over a million person lives, if you think about the number of years that these people were tracked over time to derive these metrics and these outcomes. um, it, that's about as solid of a case that you can build for anything when it comes to associating a software that can track your fitness level, your cardiovascular health, and your overall health and longevity in life. I also love the fact that it's adaptive. I actually went out for a run earlier this week, 40 to 60 minutes. I think I got close to that 75 daily limit. And that was one day. So the piece that I realized, I think, when I did that was, I don't have to exercise every single day. And that's very different than I think what you see a lot of, advertisements and other kind of people talking about, is that, daily exercise or every other day, 30 minutes, something like that. I mean, it actually changes the conversation around how much do you need, because you know exactly where that cutoff is. To 100 points, you get there. It's very precise.
Yes. And how
Absolutely. And
much do
so
you need for you? Completely personalized. Yeah.
Mhm.
your point is that if you got close to 75 in one day, you can achieve the max by just getting 25 or 30 a few days later. And so theoretically, there's nothing wrong with exercising every day, but many people find that difficult to do. Everybody's schedule is busy. Very frequently we hear people say they don't have time to exercise. The joke is, if you don't have time to exercise, you're going to have to find time for dying, or for disease. But the thing is, with PAI, it shows you that you can get to the maximal benefit by really just a few times a week if you get your heart rate up to a certain degree. Now, if you don't get your heart rate up as much, you might have to do every day. But if someone gets 16, 17 PAI points a day, if they do 6 or 7 workouts a week, then they can get their 100 points by doing by having a lower heart rate. But if you get your heart rate up to a pretty good level, which is really the best way to improve your fitness. I mean, obviously all athletes know that already, because that's why they do interval training. That people, if you don't win a race by just going out and running slow every day. You got to sometimes run very fast and do intervals to improve your performance. And so that's true for health as well.
Um, Chip, that's a fantastic point I want to highlight, is that the PAI score makes the science that elite athletes have been using for decades now, and makes it accessible to the common person. It takes complicated VO2 max calculations and science on cardiorespiratory fitness much more understandable, achievable, because it's just one number, it's a score. I need to try and get my 100 over 7 days and keep my 100.
Right, and again, you don't have to be an elite athlete for this to be very applicable to you. You can be 70 years old and not be able to walk a 20-minute mile, and so it's what your heart rate does. If you're very unfit, your heart rate's going to go up fast when you try to just do a little bit of walking. And so someone who's unfit we could be sitting there watching them and they look like they're not even walking too fast, but they're getting PAI points because they're raising their heart rate.
Yeah, absolutely.
Whereas if somebody's an athlete, to get their PAI points, they're going to have to be, running, faster. But for the average person, a lot of times just a brisk walk or doing riding an exercise cycle, doing an elliptical machine, or doing a slow swim, doing water exercises, they could be raising their heart rate enough that they're getting PAI points.
Exactly. And again, another great point, because unlike steps, PI counts all activity that aren't based on using your legs. So swimming, cycling, yoga, even playing with children, grandchildren, all of that counts. So we might not be able to help you to turn the clock back on your actual age, but we can definitely help people lower their fitness age. And in fact, the fitness age is another way of translating very complicated science and data to allow people to have a quick glance on their wearable or on their smartphone. Is how is my fitness age doing? How is it improving? Because I'm following PI. In an age where there's so much content, there are so many dashboards, so many scores, I think it's a real standout how simple the PI score is.
I like a lot of these points, and there's one in particular that I wanted to again reemphasize, is that I think one of the problems that I had with trying to track steps, for instance, is that I could, you could walk at a slow pace for 5 hours and barely feel anything, exaggerating a little bit, but really, so that is one part of it. Doesn't really necessarily raise your heart rate, and the other part of it is what does it mean? What does 10,000 steps actually mean for my health, and how? Like, I have no way of connecting the dots there, and so this is the Pi index itself, the score helps to solve both of those problems.
Correct. And actually, again, you want everyone to be becoming more physically active. And certainly, somebody who's not doing 2,000 steps a day, who raises their steps to 12,000 steps a day, they're probably getting some good out of it. But your point is that not all steps are the same. And so to maximize your benefits, it'd be good to be having at least some of the steps at a faster pace where the heart rate's going up. Because as you said, if you walk really slow, your heart rate might not go up by 5 beats or 10 beats a minute, and you may not even be getting any PI points for that. And obviously, you don't have to go real fast to get PI points. But if you go real fast, you get a lot of PI points because your heart rate's higher. And if you go just a little bit fast, you have to go further to get the PI points. But
Indeed.
just counting steps does not tell you the true story.
Indeed, and that's why we position the PI metric as a smart metric, because it adapts to your progress, and it becomes more intuitive, and it goes some way to helping you make some behavioral changes as you are educated about what sort of steps or activities give you the most health benefit. And that's so important in this day and age, because when you look at the amount spent in the US, for example, in fitness as an industry, I read in 2019 it was around $220 billion, which is a vast amount of money. But when you look at the results, most adults in the US are failing to meet the recommended 30 minutes of just basic physical activity per week. And that's just walking down the road. And so there's a huge discrepancy there. And we really want to help people become smarter about their exercise, because there is a will and intention there, and people are investing in it in a monetary term. And that's why we've built our software to be an API. For those of the audience don't know, that's the application. I always call it API, so it's an application program interface. And what that is that we integrate with other apps, other digital platforms, because we want to add and enhance what people are already doing and enjoy doing, and not add something extra for them to do. And so we see a big opportunity, particularly in the US, to enhance a lot of this intention and investment into physical activity, that derive more value out of it and ultimately have better health outcomes to prevent death from cardiovascular disease, which remains the biggest preventable killer in the US and in most countries around the world.
I should have had something that I probably should have had in my talk, was that not to discount that we want. It's great if if everyone was getting 150 minutes a week, 30 minutes, 5 days a week of moderate physical activity. but we showed in the first paper that those who didn't meet that guideline, but who met their PAI score, got the full effect on cardiovascular mortality and all-cause mortality reduction. Whereas vice versa, if you met your guideline minutes but didn't meet the PAI score, you didn't seem to get that much reduction in your risk. So meeting the PAI score was even more important than just looking at the minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Now, granted, many people who are getting the minutes are going to probably reach their PAI score. But you know, if you got one of the two, if you can get your 100 PAI points in 40 minutes a week or 30 minutes a week, you seem to be maximizing your benefit.
That's really, really interesting. I almost want to let that point kind of linger a little bit. The really important point. One of the other reasons why I brought up the idea of using steps, it's such a common, it's almost like part of pop culture nowadays. But also because, you know, if you're in an office-based setting, a lot, you know, I used to work with a lot of colleagues that would have their watches on, their wearables, and so, you know, in between breaks, you know, in between work, you go on a lunch break or something like that. Maybe you go walk up and down the stairs, or you walk around the hallway. A lot of people did this sort of thing. Counting steps basically was the goal, and you know, I thought maybe there's some merit to it. Okay, but you know, is it really? Is that the best way to go if your intention is to improve your cardiovascular fitness, to prevent disease and increase longevity? And I wasn't convinced. You know, there wasn't a clear connection there. So I do want to come back to the point of how PAI can help in a workplace, with workplace wellness programs, and how it can help through some of your partnerships. Um, I also wanted to touch on a couple other aspects of what this actually means from a clinical perspective, because I'm sure that there will be a lot of clinicians that are interested in using this sort of thing for a variety of applications. Part of it has to do with clinical research. Part of it has to do with being able to manage their patients under their management, perhaps you know, improve treatment plans as well. So Chip, you know, from your perspective, what are some of the main selling features of using PAI in a clinical practice, whether it's specialists or even just primary care setting?
Well, it's simple, and people, you know, it's very easy to use. It's got proven, so clinicians want to make sure that there's science behind it, and there's science behind it. It's something that if someone got their PAI points, you know that they are maximizing their prevention from a physical activity standpoint. And that's something that a lot of clinicians don't really know how to give an exercise prescription. They don't really know. It seems like it'd be pretty simple to say, go walk or do a bicycle or elliptical machine for 150 minutes per week. But then the patient asks, well, how hard should I be doing it? And they don't know. And so this is very simple, and clinicians can use this and recommend that get at least 50 PAI and preferably get 100 PAI to maximize your benefits. It's something that employees could use to incent their workers. I mean, employees are paying for healthcare in much of the world. In the United States, they are. I don't know if that's the case in Canada, but in the United States, employees are paying for most of the healthcare, and so employees want to have lower healthcare costs. And they also want to have a more healthy workforce, because a healthy workforce is more engaged. So employees could use this to incent their workers. Also, insurance companies could use it to give lower premiums to those who are healthier. So there's a lot of clinical potential applications, including what Sally kind of mentioned earlier, like, you know, something like a cardiac rehab. After a cardiac event, patients normally go into the center in the program. Well, the problem is that those programs are tremendously underutilized, even way before COVID. And during COVID, most of the centers were closed down. And so this would be a remote way that not only would be helpful during COVID, but it would have been helpful before COVID and after COVID. Hopefully we have an after. Something that could reach a lot more patients than the 10% of patients or so who actually join the formal in-center cardiac rehabilitation programs. People want to have hybrid models. They want to be able to exercise on their own in their own time, not when somebody else tells them you have to do this class. And you can do all of that with the PAI.
Yeah, maybe some of your audience is thinking, well, not everyone likes to have a wearable device on their wrist. And I wanted to share that innovation technology around heart rate sensors is developing very quickly. And so we call these form factors. And PAI Health is in the process of working with more partners in different form factors. For example, smart textiles, where you're able to have undergarments, and particularly for the elderly or people who are coming out of major heart surgery. We are also able to take the heart rates through these. Also, the earbuds, where you're listening to music, working out, or even people in call center settings where they have headsets. We do need continuous heart rate data, but the heart rate data that we really need to generate a PAI score is when you're raising your heart rate from the resting heart rate. So you don't actually have to wear a sensor all the time, like when you're asleep and so on. So this is one of the misconceptions I wanted to flag.
Yeah, I would also reemphasize that too. I mean, it's one of the, from a general consumer perspective, one of the big selling features to me is that it's device agnostic. I happen to
Yes.
have a Fitbit. I've been using it for years now, but you can use it with any number of devices. And that flexibility is something that I'm sure a lot of people would like. And I'm sure with the API, of course, it'll be integratable, if that's the right word, with a lot of other devices going forward as well. So it's a positive, very easy to use, easy to understand. Intuitive, helps with the behavior change and the motivation, I
Mhm.
think, as well. There's another kind of interesting question in my mind here. Can anybody use it? It is adaptable, but can anybody use it in terms of certain patient populations? So we're talking about cardiac rehab programs. A lot of those patients would be coming out of a cardiac event. Is it safe for them to use as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, I showed one of the papers that was published in the Mayo Clinic Proceedings, which was data on 3,300 patients with cardiovascular disease. So these were cardiac patients who were showing that those who got high PAI, had a very good prognosis. And so there's very few cardiac patients that we would recommend don't exercise. And there are a couple of situations, but that's a very a small percentage of patients. Almost every patient who's had a heart attack, who's had a stent, who's had a bypass surgery, who's had uh, many different types of heart disease, we want them all to be physically active, and we like them all to be getting the right amount of exercise. And so, really, exercise is safe. And again, if somebody's having, crushing chest pain when they walk across the room, they got to do something else. They need either more medicines, or they need another stent or a bypass surgery. But once they have that, and if heart has been stabilized, we want everybody to be physically active and exercise. So there's very few situations where we're not recommending physical activity. And again, there's now data with the cardiovascular disease patients showing that those who reach higher PAI have basically a 25% lower mortality.
Hmm. And if I remember the slide correctly, I think it was like 5 to 7 years on your lifespan.
Yeah, so the average was about 5 years, but the younger people, obviously, younger people have more time that they're going to live, and so the younger people in the mid 50s, they actually extended their lifespan by an average of 7 years if they reach their PAI goal. Whereas a 70-year-old, somebody who's 75, they only got a 2-year improvement if they reach their PAI, because they're not going to live as long anyway. But still, for a 75-year-old, if you tell a typical 75-year-old, if you do this, you can live 2 more years. You can live to 90 instead of 88, or you can live to 82 instead of 80. That's a pretty nice thing for many people.
And live in better health. Yeah, that's very important.
Yeah, because it's not just about longevity; it's also about freedom from other diseases, and so improving your quality of life is important too. Obviously, our papers are more talking about cardiovascular mortality and death, not necessarily quality of life. But I think it's a general understanding that people who are physically active typically will have lower depression, lower anxiety, lower various psychological diseases, and they end up improving almost all of their quality of life scores. We've not done the studies on that with PAI, but that's been shown with many cardiac rehabilitation papers and and many physical activity papers that chronic diseases and quality of life is certainly improved by physical activity and exercise.
And so, Dorian, I would love to, on that note, ask anyone in your audience to kindly reach out to us if they're interested in doing some of these studies and doing these pilots, particularly on corporate wellness, because we know that unfortunately one of the many impacts of COVID-19 is the impact on people's mental health, particularly people who are working. And so in any way that we can help alleviate that in a way that is very non-contact, that is scalable. Most people have a smartphone. The penetration of wearables is very high in the US. We'd love to hear from them, because this is a challenge that we all have to group together to address.
We mentioned COVID and the impact that that's had on people's personal lives and working lives as well a couple of times. Has that impacted the way forward for PAI Health? Are the partnerships that you had, let's say, in place or that you were working toward pre-pandemic, are those still ongoing?
So the partnerships in Asia, Asia has bounced back relatively quicker than the Western world for lots of reasons that we won't have time to go into here. So they're still very much in place. However, for the US, it's definitely made us focus a lot more, where the market is telling us we need better solutions, and by better, ones that are easily deployed, scientifically validated, and scalable. And so that's why we are API first, particularly for corporate wellness. And then the other strong signal coming from the US market is virtual cardiac rehab, and the great need for it, because the inability to get to rehab center has really prevented lots of people who are interested in doing it in the first place. And that has a real dollar value to insurance companies, as well as a human cost, which is really, really important. So those are the two areas. And then thirdly, we're also really interested in tackling the prevention of type 2 diabetes through exercise, and partnering with other health techs, med techs around diabetes solutions. And this is primarily driven by the stats that we're seeing from the mortality rates of COVID-19, particularly in the US again. If you have type 2 diabetes, your mortality rate increases by 2.5. From COVID. So there's a real serious health crisis going on here. So that's really helped us sharpen our focus.
Mhm. Um, I know we're running close on time here, so definitely appreciate those messages. There was one other piece that I wanted uh, to ask you about with respect to how PAI Health can help, again, to get folks through the COVID period, and ultimately to help with population health and with program development and so on. And then I'd like to turn it over to you for some final thoughts. One of PAI Health's core offerings, I believe, maybe I can call it that, is this dashboard tool. And so I've downloaded the app. I have it on my phone. It's very easy to use. And it's available to general consumers, also available, I believe, to payers and to employers and to clinicians as well, to help keep track of their patients. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about that, and how that sort of adds to a workplace wellness program.
Sure. So as you mentioned, we offer a web-based dashboard that can be used across a number of use cases. And our web-based dashboard makes it easy for employers or insurers to manage population health across groups and product lines, if you like. And it also allows healthcare providers to manage and monitor individual patients. So the dashboard works in sync with our app, but we're also app agnostic, if you like. So we can also work with the apps of our customers because we offer our API solution, which allows our partners to integrate the PAI experience into their apps. So they can track the analytics in their reporting systems. So at a corporate use case, often the HR department directors find this dashboard very useful if they're running a wellness campaign. So we really try to give our partners the flexibility to design an experience that works best for their needs. And we're very much into co-development of these solutions with them. Many customers actually start with our app and then they move on to the dashboard. And it's a really easy way to deploy a pilot to get started. And then once we have the learnings and we iterate on what has worked well with their population, we're able to integrate our APIs for a full-scale commercial rollout. We are also doing a number of clinical research trials with our app and our dashboard, and we have received very positive feedback from clinicians who are excited about the increased insights that we are helping patients with lifestyle behavior change. And that really ultimately is where all of this points to. It's making meaningful lifestyle behavioral changes, which we all know takes time. You know, we all know we should eat more vegetables, drink less, and not smoke and move more. But actually achieving those lifestyle behavioral changes takes a lot of support and education.
Mhm.
And that's why we love working with fantastic thought leaders like Chip. And we're very humble that he has been a part of our journey through to commercialization.
It's also it's wonderful to hear. I'd like to emphasize the fact that you can there's a strong lifestyle factor in underlying this entire conversation, I think, and the fact that you can really draw a very clear bridge between the pi score itself, your activity, the pi score itself, and the impact this is going to have on your overall health, and then potential that has from a population perspective as well. And Chip, I'd love to hear your perspective also on, are people underemphasizing or not thinking enough about the fact that a healthy, active lifestyle can really just have huge impacts on your overall health and well-being? We know that the major causes of death and disease and morbidity, mortality in the world, they're really lifestyle related. So I mean, I see this as a huge player in helping that. Do you have the same perspective?
Yeah, I think that certainly an issue has always been is that most people have practiced, medicine in a fee-for-service model, and so what you're doing is people come into the office for an illness. They come into the office because of a pain or they're sick, and they get that issue treated. And so prevention has never been the number one thing in most clinicians' focus. It's not that they don't believe in it, but patients come into the office generally. It's changing a little bit with managed healthcare, but for most clinicians' lives, it's been people coming in to treat their current illness. The current illness could be burning urine, or it could be a fever. But the emphasis has not been on long-term health, and so I think that's changing, and certainly in primary health plans, primary care practices, or when care is managed, people realize not only do we want to do the right thing by making our population healthy, but we are going to save money in the long run by having a healthier population. And so I do think that that it's not that clinicians don't believe in it. It's just that their time in their 15-minute office visits is generally treating the problem that people have come in with. So one needs to be proactive for long-term with prevention.
Great message. thanks so much to both of you. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I would love to have a longer conversation, but we are short on time for today. So perhaps I can have both of you join at some point in the future as more things happen with PAI Health and things progress and more studies come out as well. I'd love to hear about that. Again, thank you both for your time this morning. Wish you
Thanks
all
for
the best
having
and
us,
look forward
Dorian.
to
Thank
seeing more.
you.
Thank you.
Pleasure.